His topic is the humanities and student civic engagement, and he is telling me that my cheap watch is wrong. It is saying it's saying 12:30, and so I have a little introduction, and so that might take up some of the time, and then we will here at 12:30. So, as I was saying, that he is a former chair and current professor in the Department of History, in addition to serving as the founding director of the Center for the Study of Citizenship. He came to Wayne State University in 1975.
At age 8.
Yes. After earning degrees from prestigious universities, from Cornell with a BS and from Yale University, 3 degrees, an MA, an MPhil, and a PhD degree. And so we were smart enough to recruit him, and this university has not regretted it at all. I'll tell you that he has received the President Award for Excellence in Teaching, the Board of Governors Recognition Award twice, and he has been awarded a Board of Governors Distinguished Faculty Fellowship. He's also published enormously. Of course, he is a full professor in a major research university, so you can imagine that his publication list is quite considerable. I'll just mention a couple of things. He's the author of 2 books, one entitled Between Authority and Liberty, State Constitution Making in Revolutionary America, which was published by UNC Press in 1997. And he has Parties and Politics in North Carolina, 1836 through 1865, published by University of Louisiana State Press in 1983. And he is co-editor along with Richard Marbach of The Meaning of Citizenship, along with numerous articles. He has been awarded the Andrew W. Mellon Faculty Fellowship in the Humanities at Harvard University and a National Endowment for Humanities Research Fellow. In 1999, he was a Fulbright Senior Lecturer at the University of Rome. And as I said, he's been director of the Center for the Study of Citizenship since 2002. And he's been teaching American history here at Wayne since 1975. I have to mention, however, that he is a friend of the mission of the Humanities Center and has offered his scholarship in support of the center on several occasions. For example, in October 2010, he gave a Brownback talk entitled Abraham Lincoln Bicentral Reflections, and he is also actively involved in other Humanities Center programs. He won a faculty fellowship in the 1993-94 competition, faculty fellowship competition, for his paper entitled Suffrage and the Forging of Civic Identity in Revolutionary America. He was a resident scholar in 2002-2003, and I think it was during that residency that the Center for the Study of Citizenship was conceived. And he is currently a resident scholar in the 2015-2016 and now 2016-2017 seasons. He has been an excellent citizen of the residency program, attending our Brownback talks, resident scholars roundtable, as often as his busy schedule allows him, and has been a central contributor to those conversations. We'll be having one tomorrow, and he will be there with a number of good ideas, I'm sure. So I am absolutely delighted to welcome him to the podium. At least I hope that it is now 12:32, so time has arrived. So please welcome him to the podium with applause.
Thank you, Walter, for your usual very generous introduction. I could speak for most of my time this afternoon explaining my deep gratitude to you and to the Humanities Center for the extraordinary opportunities that it has provided me as a scholar and provided for the university. As someone who was actually on the rather extensive committee that developed the NEH proposal challenge grant to establish the Humanities Center, seeing what Walter's leadership has done has been extraordinary. The opportunity to be a resident scholar, yes indeed, it was the founding moment for the Center for the Study of Citizenship. But more than that, these resident scholar opportunities provide all of us who've been so honored with an opportunity to learn from one another and from Walter. And if you want to, Walter is a true, as you all observe at the Brown Bags, a scholar and a gentleman out here. For those of you who have the honor and opportunity to be a resident scholar, there's another side of Walter that you will enjoy every bit as much, which is the way in which he presses you hard to explain your work more clearly, to delve into the theoretical underpinnings of it. So I would encourage all of you who are faculty members to apply for the resident scholarships. I've applied to make mine permanent. That application has been rejected. So I urge you to seek out every opportunity that you can to continue to engage in this marvelous enterprise that Walter leads. And I think it's appropriate, since this is the end presentation, that we give Walter the hand that he deserves for his leadership.
Thank you.
You're quite welcome. It just seems that you deserve to have the same kind of abuse that you heap on others to have heaped on you as well. I see that Tom Fisher, the co-chair of the General Education Reform Committee, he is here, and not because of his presence, but because of the work of the committee. I'd like actually to begin there, because the General Education Reform Committee has adopted as in its proposal a Year 3 capstone course. The course recommended, the committee writes, should address big contemporary issues that reflect the uniqueness of our university, just like, as I'm sure many of you are becoming familiar with, the Year 1 signature courses. However, the capstone courses would become distinctive, in the words of the committee, emphasizing an explicit pairing of course subject matter with some form of community engagement. In my talk today, I'd like to explain why I believe that community engagement is an essential part of the general education curriculum, and also to take this as an opportunity to urge you to explore ways to extend citizenship across the curriculum. Underlying the idea that citizenship across the curriculum is the understanding of the purpose of public higher education. And that is to prepare students for lives of civic engagement and good citizenship. We can begin to take strides toward obtaining that goal by infusing our curriculum with public purpose. Some of you who are not members of disciplines like mine, history, or like Jeff Gronowski in political science or Brett Roth, where the deepening of civic understanding is woven tightly into the curriculum, you may wonder how this concept applies to you. Why should the many other disciplines include citizenship in their curricula? The first answer to this question is that public purpose is woven into the mission statements of virtually every professional and disciplinary society. For example, the American Chemical Society, with more than 160,000 members, its mission is to advance the broader chemistry enterprise. It said something here about alchemists, but, and its practitioners for the benefit of Earth and its people. Or the American Association of Engineering Societies' vision of advancing the engineering profession's impact on the public good. The American Society of Civil Engineers imagines that the civil engineers of 2025 will be leaders in discussions and decisions shaping public environmental and infrastructure policies, among other important public responsibilities. The American Psychological Associations, that's a sop to you, Tom, as a professor of psychology, its mission is to advance the creation, communication, and application of psychological knowledge to benefit society and improve people's lives. I could go on and on. The American Bar Association, the American Medical Association, all of them promote the role that their professions, their organizations have in contributing to the public good. And if the introduction, and I would say that it is pervasive, introduction of public purpose into the way in which we teach at Wayne State helps us to, and our students, to fulfill their professional responsibilities to the public good, it also helps to advance Wayne State's status as a Carnegie community engagement institution, one of only 7 research universities in the country also receiving the Carnegie designation. According to the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching, community engagement, and its important but brief definition, describes collaboration between institutions of higher education and their larger communities. I know there's been some discussion of what's a community since the Gen Ed Committee's report, but the larger communities would, I think, refer to the local, regional, state, national, and global communities of which we are a part. all done, in the words of the foundation, for the mutually beneficial exchange of knowledge and resources in a context of partnership and, importantly, reciprocity. The purpose of community engagement is the partnership of college and university knowledge and resources with those of the public and private sectors to enrich scholarship, research, and creative activity, to enhance the curriculum, to strengthen teaching and learning, to prepare educated and engaged citizens, to strengthen democratic and civic values and civic responsibility, and to contribute to the public good. The development of citizenship across the curriculum will deepen and broaden the university's commitment to civic engagement. By embedding citizenship across the curriculum, we also enable the university to fulfill its mission to positively impact local and global communities, and to realize its vision for itself as a preeminent public university, research university, known for academic and research excellence, success across a diverse student body, and meaningful engagement in its urban community. Community engagement will not only benefit the university, but also will enable our students to be more successful. The evidence is overwhelming that community-engaged education engenders student success. Students who take courses that have a community-engaged learning component to them tend to succeed academically, stay in school, and graduate at rates much higher than students who do not roll in such high-impact classes. By putting theory into action, students learn more and learn what one researcher points out as the higher order learning skills. As one researcher, Christine Kress, observes, abstract concepts come into relief against the background of situation and context as students consider, apply, test, assess, and reevaluate multiple disciplinary approaches to solving an array of human, mechanical, and environmental challenges. Community-engaged learning enables students to turn classroom theory into practice, to understand the practical implications of what they are learning in the classroom. As the leading organization in higher education promoting civic engagement, the American Association of Colleges and Universities states that the idea is to give students direct experience with issues they are studying in the curriculum and with ongoing efforts to analyze and solve problems in the community. A key element in these programs is the opportunity students have to both apply what they are learning in real-world settings and reflecting in a classroom setting on their service experiences. These programs model the idea that giving something back to the community is an important college outcome, and that working with community partners is good preparation for citizenship, for work, and for life. The process itself leads students into activities that benefit them as learners. They promote active and collaborative learning, improve student-faculty relationships, take place in a supportive campus environment, and enhance the level of academic challenge that students face. Recently, faculty received an email with an RFP inviting science faculty to offer ways to reimagine the science curriculum in order to enhance student success. I would suggest that when students are taking science classes and learning the abstract subject matter, that it generates detachment from the ways in which what they're studying can connect to the public purpose of understanding these subjects. And community-engaged learning, discussing the technical as part of an understanding of the public purpose, in effect, infuses the humanities, if you will, into and the social sciences into the science curriculum, and I believe will lead to greater student understanding and learning. I'm hoping to find a science faculty member who'd like to test that idea out, or that hypothesis out. It's also, I would argue, very practical benefits that accrue from civic learning or community engaged learning. Students want it. They want to engage the community. They come to college expecting to engage the community. We have all sorts of careful studies about student expectations when they arrive at university, when they leave. Always enthusiastic about engagement, almost always disappointed by the relative lack of engagement by the time they graduate. We talk about issues relating to the recruitment of students to Wayne. We worry about our enrollments. I believe that civic engagement is one of the solutions to our enrollment problem. If you look, and here we can draw a little bit on Tulane's experience after Katrina, with, as Tulane, perhaps as much of necessity as anything else, took a leadership role in the rebuilding of New Orleans after the flood, built civic learning and into the curriculum at both the general education, introductory level, and in all of majors. This engagement has, I would argue, made Tulane one of the most applied to private universities in the country. Tulane, as one observer noted, had made a virtue of civic engagement, and as a consequence attracted a cadre of superbly responsible students. I believe that community engagement will help the university with recruitment, retention, graduation rates. That's not bad, but there's more. Classes that foster civic skills also meet the demands of Wayne State's very practical, job-oriented students. a factor that is prevalent. It's been part of Wayne State's culture for as long as I've been here, and as I've mentioned, I've been here since I was 8 years old. But that practical orientation has spread widely. And I would argue that both curricular and co-curricular projects that involve civic engagement provide students with the job skills most desired by employers. They strengthen problem solving, successful collaboration, provide real-life experience, and foster stronger communication skills. As our outgoing Secretary of Education, Arne Duncan, observed in an essay written for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, new employees need critical thinking and problem-solving skills, the ability to synthesize information, solid communication skills, and the ability to work on a team. All skills fostered by purposeful civic inquiry and civic engagement. The Chamber itself, particularly, I knew when I mentioned the U.S. Chamber of Commerce it would attract a new additional audience. The Chamber in particular laments the lack of soft skills coming from college graduates. Many individuals today lack analytical skills, critical thinking skills, creativity, and presentation skills. They don't plan well, don't work well on projects, don't work well on small teams, and don't communicate effectively orally or in writing. There are more benefits, I would argue, for job seekers than only the specific skills that are obtained from the collaborative work of civic engagement. Students who are civically informed and civically engaged also help businesses to obtain another crucial benefit, fulfilling a business's commitment to corporate citizenship. In ever-expanding numbers, corporations issue reports assessing their corporate citizenship. Of course, to some extent, we may dismiss such efforts as marketing gimmicks without substance, like greenwashing, or they embrace good corporate citizenship because they are driven by profit, not citizenship. Yes. I would suggest that in fact businesses are coming to recognize that good corporate citizenship is actually profitable. It helps companies to recruit the best employees. We know that among the millennial generation is a strong desire to work for companies that view themselves and their employees as citizens. And they want to hire people who understand the broader community in which a business functions. It helps companies to promote employee retention. One of the greatest costs that businesses have is employee turnover. Fosters successful leadership development. It's not the technical skills that get you to the C offices, but the civic and humanistic and social science skills. It builds relationships with communities in which businesses function. supports trust in a business's marketing of its products and services, and builds trust in a community for those businesses that invariably screw up. There will be inevitable crises in corporate citizenship, and here our dean of our College of Fine Performing and Communication Arts, Matt Seeger, could speak to the way in which we can help businesses navigate crises. The reasons why businesses are increasingly embracing corporate citizenship practices is also a reason why they want to hire graduates who possess civic skills and will help advance the corporate citizenship goals of the business. So, for a lot of reasons, we should be getting our students engaged with community. But what is the impact of community engaged learning on the communities themselves? We know that universities have historically often a bad relationship with communities, in the sense that researchers come in, complete their research project, and leave, leaving the community no better off than before. Sustained engagement is key, but we know that community engaged learning projects benefit communities, and they benefit communities because it would be unethical for us to go in and not be of value, but to, in effect, exploit the communities for our own and our students' benefit. But we know that a regular stream of students provides organizations with labor that enables those organizations to expand operations, enables them to educate students about their missions and needs, fosters the development of their own ambassadors to the community, and creates a pipeline of future volunteers. When it's done well, the community benefits, students benefit, and the university benefits. The status of, now want to talk about issues of kind of practical implementation, but well, I'm torn because I've laid out an argument here, and I have yet another argument about how we can build these kinds of programs. I'm tempted to simply open this up for conversation at this point, but I think that in order for us to implement what the General Education Reform Committee seeks to do, and Truth in Advertising, I was just welcomed to join the subcommittee on community engagement. I'm very excited about that opportunity. But in fact, we have these kinds of practices scattered around the university. I see Zach Brewster from sociology. I know Sharon Lean has done it, and I know many others of you who have done it as well, though not the students. Some of you may have participated in classes that have. It's very much part of professional schools. The professional schools oftentimes like to hide it as professional development. So you'll see primarily the ways in which law clinics talk about civic engagement is about professional development, and instead of about civic engagement, but of course it is both. We have a vibrant, a bunch of, as our former dean of the law school, Bob Ackerman, can attest, a significant number of legal clinics. One could easily imagine undergraduate service learning classes connecting to the legal clinics or to the required co-curricular program for medical students at the university's medical school. There are similar programs in all of the university's professional schools. We tend to talk about community engaged learning as an undergraduate practice, but we should be in a position both to enhance community engagement in the professional schools, which would require faculty to think of this as community engagement, not only as professional development. We also know at the undergraduate level, the Honors College has built a splendid program of service learning that is built into the essence of its curriculum. I might also add that community engagement doesn't mean that you're doing simply volunteer work. It can take innumerable different forms. There's a very exciting program in student philanthropy that could provide an opportunity for students to engage with multiple organizations as they contribute money donated to them by foundations or contribute their time. The psychology course might solicit applications for funding from organizations that focus on mental health, child development, and the like. Invite representatives of organizations to speak in class, to make students sent out to make site visits. This is just one, or these are several of many possibilities. The center right now, the Citizenship Center, is developing its work as a hub for community engaged research on campus, and the opportunity to connect the many projects of community engaged research to community engaged learning projects that are emerging at the university as part of the general education curriculum could provide yet other opportunities to link community engaged learning to community engaged research. So there are a range of ways in which the university could foster community engagement. I think even though I would like to go on for another 25 or 30 minutes, I won't. I would point out that the ways in which faculty can engage in these projects are manifold, but in the end, the university will, and I'll end on a very practical note, will have to provide an essential organizational infrastructure in order for this to happen on a wide scale. If we leave it to faculty alone, we will drown in the new gen ed requirement. There must be an infrastructure that can facilitate all of this work. And the possibilities are many, but we have to have people working with the Office of Teaching and Learning to train faculty, to have to build connections through the Office of Government Affairs and Community Relations to all the organizations on campus that are the ones reaching out. I've talked with Zach about his class, and his students find service opportunities. That is what you can do when you don't have support. But I think Zach would be the first to say it's not good enough. And we need an entity that can keep track of student hours, ensure that students are doing appropriate work, not running errands or pouring coffee, that can sponsor events that promote student engagement, that build relationships with philanthropists and faculty, that might help develop a signature program that could cross numerous courses. Missouri State University, for example, has a vision program where they are going in as undergraduates into the Ozarks and doing vision testing. And it cuts across a number of science classes. We could be doing something, the exact same thing in underserved Detroit population, or we could be doing soil testing in brownfields or in the Great Lakes State water testing as ways of engaging science classes in large-scale projects. So these are just some ideas. I think that it is clearly where higher education is headed. It is headed that way because it works and it helps. It certainly public state universities fulfill the mission that lays at the heart of why they were created. Thank you.
Well, Mark has left quite some time for.
Well, I figured I saw some grimaces, and so I can go back to my text and provide more, but I thought this would be more fun. Sandra?
Can I play devil's advocate just for the sheer hell of it?
You can.
I have purple hair after all.
If you've done red hair, you could be devil's
Two
advocate.
things spring to mind. I mean, the first, which is really perverse of me, is to remind myself of all the time I've spent quietly by myself, say on a beach, writing a poem, which really required the one trait that our students lack most of all, which is the ability to be introspective, the ability to be contemplative, the ability to be absolutely alone with themselves and their ideas and their thoughts, to sort of create something gorgeous, to capture what used to be called the sublime, okay? That's not there in most of our students. And to the extent that we associate civic engagement with sort of being out there and what they would call doing something, right? Sort of engaging in some kind of action or other. It may be that we're disincentivizing the kind of thing that I'm talking about, right? I mean, the sort of contemplative, introspective stuff might be devalued. Okay, that's one thing. That's concerned me for a very long time.
Could I
No,
respond
I
to
want to ask
that?
the second question so I don't run out of steam. The the second question has to do with the other side, which is how we think about community. I mean, the whole business about sort of saying, who's going to say what these communities are, to the extent that we homogenize and make uniform and hand things over to bureaucracies. There's a very good chance, of course, there always is, that the categories will be mostly civic, mostly political, mostly philanthropic. Won't have to do with self-identifying communities, the communities with which students themselves identify. There is the student that I happen to know in New Jersey who is simultaneously an employee of Wellesley University, a citizen of New Jersey, black, feminist, and gay. Okay? She identifies with all those communities. She could, and is very, very uninterested in philanthropic work because she's a writer and an editor.
Right.
So you do have, which is what I've been grappling with Jeanette. What the hell do we mean by community? And more than that, who's going to say? Who's going to say what that community will be?
Okay.
That's a problem. So those are my two questions.
To answer the first question, or to respond to the first question, of course, they should be doing the kind of interior work that you're talking about. Let me finish, because I'm going to forget the second question. And we should be nurturing that ability to be by oneself, to be reflective, to sit and think and write. There's no question about that. I think that if we made every class at the university one that required community engagement, you would get a very flat education in some ways. But if you also had one that sat you only at the beach writing poetry, I would argue you'd have an equally flat education. I think that the mix of them,
No, Mark, I was only talking about what gets valorized. That's what I'm talking about.
I think they both should be.
Well, right.
I don't see.
I agree.
I'm advocating for something that has not been valorized at the university and is only recently, in the last generation, becoming an accepted part of the mission of higher education. So I think that adding that is not make higher education into a zero-sum game that somehow diminishes the other. When it comes to community, when it comes to student philanthropy, for example, that one's simple. They've got to be a 501c3 in order to give away money. As a general rule, it has been a practice of connection with nonprofit organizations.
I don't think.
And that's where that's been the normal practice. You shouldn't be going in there to help somebody make money. That becomes exploitative. But I think that that as a general rule, it's been connecting with an organization or a public project. I think that in fact it will require sustained discussion and argument. In our own department in history, you have to get approved by the Honors College in order to have your class designated as what they call a service learning class. And Tracy Newman, who teaches history of Detroit was initially rejected because the committee that did the evaluation didn't see how writing history would be a surface learning activity, and Tracy patiently explained how they were writing good history about Detroit for a nonprofit organization that contributed to a deepening of public knowledge of the city's history. Yeah, I think that there'll be arguments always about it.
Well, I wasn't asking about philanthropy precisely. I was asking about, how those categories would be determined and at the expense of student self-identification, that's all.
Well, no, what I'm saying is that it would be a nonprofit organization that could be about any of the community identifiers of your student.
So I don't have purple hair. As a matter of fact,
You
I
should
don't have any hair. But I am in a purple haze. And that haze is going to involve in about 10 minutes walking downstairs to a meeting of the Academic Senate Curriculum and Instruction Committee, which we will doubtless take on the new Gen Ed, some of the issues involved in the new Gen Ed. And so I'm not really speaking as a devil's advocate, because this is a real concrete question, okay? So I'm perplexed by what sounds to me like an oxymoron, a Gen Ed capstone course, which is supposed to incorporate this kind of community engagement of which you speak. How do you prevent that from becoming a kind of, shall I say, physics for poets?
Yes.
That is really very superficial, or pushing people who are still in Gen Ed, not a capstone in a major, but still in Gen Ed, into an area of professional endeavor that is beyond their competence?
First of all, I would say that I was not on the Gen Ed Reform Committee. Second, I don't personally like the idea of calling it a capstone. I understand that the idea behind it is to take all the theoretical abstract work that you've done in your major, and then you're connecting it to something called the real world. But my own inclination from a pedagogical point of view would be to locate it either earlier or embedding it in, as I was really suggesting, in a variety of classes. I'm not fond of the capstone term because most of the undergraduate departments have capstone classes, and I think it can confuse matters.
Which are truly the culmination of a major.
Right, and so, I mean, there's an integrative role described by the Reform Committee's report that is, I think, probably very much appropriate for a capstone. I think at least the one I know, the history departments, does that already. I'd like to see the opportunities for community engaged learning to be widely available. I'd personally like to see them in majors also. I don't think that because we have one Gen Ed requirement that somehow I don't think students are going to run away from them. The evidence at other universities is quite the opposite. So I think we'll have an opportunity for departments that are inclined to build it into their major requirements. Personally, I'd like to see it as the gen ed opportunity as fulfilled in a variety of ways, which I also believe will be easier to administer than trying to embed it in every major, say. So I joined the committee just last week, and that's how I feel about, I don't disagree with you, Bob. Brad?
I'd like to make a plea for a change in rhetoric with respect to the use of the word theory in the way that this stuff gets discussed. And this was actually in the General Education Reform Committee report as well. You know, I'm a political theorist in part of what I do. And actually, the rest of what I do is the application of political theory to other things that are more empirical. Most of my colleagues do things that are much more strictly empirical. The idea that what we are doing in the classroom is about theory, and you know, means I almost expect to hear this from a Tea Party legislator, you know, for whom theory and book learning are kind of the same thing. And so, you know, I think it undermines the dignity of both theory and empirical studies. To use the word theory in the way that is.
Excellent. You're absolutely right. I will change it instantly. In fact, the committee, the Gen Ed subcommittee has talked about learning in the classroom to experiential learning. And what I was doing was, in effect, cribbing from the literature that has built up around. There's a journal From Theory to Practice, and the AAC&U also builds its language around that. But of course, you're right. I mean, and it should have been something that smacked me over the head, since it's not how I teach either. So, well-deserved point, and it won't happen again. Holly?
I had a different question, if people don't mind me moving this in a different direction. My question was, you mentioned you were situating the center for as a hub for community engaged research and leadership. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Right now, the plan is to start with health researchers. We have some support from the Vice President for Research. And the idea will be to connect people who are doing research in health and healthcare issues. But the goal is to make it open to everybody, to facilitate conversation, communication. I think that we can all agree about how at the university we tend to live in silos, intellectual, and probably not balloon or bubbles the way people out in the real world walk around in bubbles. That's a joke about all the bubbles that prevented people from understanding what was happening in politics. But I think that there's so much opportunity for mutual learning that doesn't take place in. I'll put in a plug for Ahmad Ezzedin's engagement.wayne.edu, which is a registry for all kinds of community engagement on campus. And want to be in a position to both help populate that, but also use that populated registry to help bring researchers together in different places. Right now, we have space in the iBio building and up on Woodward, and hope to launch that in January. Stephen Mancendro. Right, thank you.
I want to go back to the beating up on you theme, which I thought was more fun.
Yes, it always is.
Actually, it is. I actually have had the pleasure of going to a bunch of these this year, and this has been perhaps one of the most beat up on the speaker. So I think obviously people think you're distinguished and respected and benefit.
No, pile on. I love it. It's much more fun.
All right,
I don't think I'm being piled on. It's
I got-
just being appropriately challenged.
I'll try. I got 4 different things that I made notes of.
Oh, it's the test for my memory that's the
You don't have to comment on
problem.
them. I just want to be able to say it so I don't have to send you an email, right? First, several different times, you would talk about public universities, public universities, public universities. And I went to one of the schools that you went to, and I know that public service is and has long been a major part of what that school does and what it believes in. And both the schools you went to were private, and so I kept sort of wondering what's the difference between a private university and a public, and so I just, you know, if you're going to be saying there's a difference, you ought to explain what the difference is. Second point, going through my list quickly. Going back to the public service, which has been something that one of those schools has been emphasizing for a long time, right? I'm just sitting here trying to figure out what's the difference between a university that cares about public service and a university that cares about citizenship and a university that cares about community engagement, and are they all the same thing? And if they're different, then what's the difference, and one ought to try to use the right word. I'm trying to think of your people going out and doing vision testing, which I think easily is public service, and who knows, I just am thinking about what's the term and does it make a difference. And obviously, you know, I know that you've spent an immense amount of time in citizenship, but to the extent that there's really a meaningful difference, it'd be interesting to sort of now sort of think about that. Third, at one point you said something that sounded like there ought to be this across the curriculum, which I heard as meaning in every class. Then when you got some pushback and we had a little hymn to the belief in thinking for yourself and having an attention span longer than a nanosecond, you said, no, it would be a bad thing to have this in every class. So maybe you just mean have some public service / engagement in some classes, at which point that sounds like motherhood and apple pie and who can be opposed. If you're actually saying do it in every class or in most classes, that's a harder thing to prove, and then a couple of anecdotes don't get you there. And then that gets to the last one, which would be data. For instance, you rattled off that companies want to hire people with soft skills and all that. And I haven't looked at this, that could be right. I've read a bunch of newspaper stories that say that, in fact, if you want to get hired by a company, the best thing to do is to have lots of math skills, because companies really value math skills. And if you want to look at what companies pay salaries for, you'll see that people that have math skills get paid more, which suggests that your statement that they want to hire people with soft skills is not correct. In any event, it would be good to have data. You at one point said, someday you want to find one scientist who would let you try this out. Well, you know, you've been doing this for a long time, and by now, presumably, there have been a bunch of scientists that have done it, and one could have data and sort of put up evidence, and which was needed if the claim is do it all the time, but is not needed if the claim is do it on occasion, because it's a good thing. But I've been thinking it's a good thing for 30 years or so, and so there you are. So that's my pushback. Sandra, was that tough enough?
That's really good.
But you really don't have to respond. This is just, you know, giving you the pushback to, you know, stimulate your thinking when you sit on the beach thinking about poetry.
Okay.
I want to have, my
First.
question has to do with poetry.
Yeah. I would,
First,
yeah.
public versus private. I'm really getting at the very specific roles that public universities played. You can see the work of Harry Boyd in Minnesota in doing work on the recovery of public purpose in public education. That's not to say that somehow private education somehow is disconnected. I was talking about it primarily as the publicness of public universities, because we're at one and I'm advocating for it at Wayne State University. I don't disagree with you. I would see citizenship as fulfilled through public service, community engaged projects, and that those are experiences that connect people to communities and help them to think of themselves as engaged citizens and wanting to be engaged citizens. So the handful of longitudinal studies that I've looked at indicate that people, for example, in student philanthropy programs a decade later were volunteering far more, contributing philanthropically far more than students who had not had those experiences. The citizenship across the curriculum is really simply designed to suggest that public purpose can be in any class, not that it should be in every class. There's I can't remember the small liberal arts college teaching biochemistry, unhappy with the results, started teaching all the same material but as a course in public health. That was all the biochemistry that had been taught before. There's none of the technical left out. In other words, bringing the citizenship, if you will, or the public sphere into the curriculum, whether it's theoretical or empirical. So it's that it could be anywhere and everywhere, and ways of thinking about having citizenship in the curriculum might not mean a community engaged learning experience, but in thinking about the public nature of what you're learning in the class, how it connects in ways that I think make the material learned more accessible for students and more meaningful for them. So I don't think this kind of community engaged learning project ought to be everywhere. I think it ought to be somewhere. And I think that it could be in any number of disciplines that tend not to see themselves as part of the public. I mean, I got a question recently, how do the hard sciences relate to any of this? I think it's possible. Finally, soft skills versus hard I think that often business leaders are at odds with their HR departments. And I did emphasize that the importance of technical skills. That this is an important combination or a valuable combination. Do we know it's a hypothesis that it will help people? And I should have framed it as more speculative because of the things I've been thinking about relating to corporate citizenship. Whether, and it's like back in the days when newspapers mattered more, they would recommend, editors would recommend a history degree. The HR department hired students with journalism degrees. The technical training matters. So I should tamp down, I wouldn't say tamp down. I think that these are part of the whole worker and the business person. And it makes for greater success, certainly at the higher reaches of business. Sandra?
We have an actual poet in the room, in the form of ML right here. And what strikes me about what ML Liebler does is that he, I'm going to speak as if you weren't here, okay? He teaches poetry in the classroom, which is about the sort of introspective thing we were talking about sometimes, most of the time. But then he takes his poetry out into what can only be called multiple, many, myriad, shifting communities. And there are performance gigs, and there are readings, and they never happen in the same place twice, so far as I can tell. I mean, the one that I performed in was at a public library in Grosse Pointe. And I wonder, I would like ML to say whether the presence of what I'm thinking of is sort of structure around what you're doing would have an effect. Can you speak to that? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I was thinking with
Yeah.
the capstone idea,
Right.
which I guess is going to be part of the new curriculum, Gen Ed.
I'm not convinced.
Okay, no, and nobody
Or
is, I guess.
should say I haven't lost that battle yet.
But one thing is with an idea of having, a project or service connected with the capstone, which when I get back to the English department, I'm going to talk to the chair about, is a program that, for lack of another word, Poetry for the People, that was created years ago by June Jordan at UC Berkeley. And what that class is something I've been doing for a long time outside of the university. But her class was using university students and putting them in, let's say, non-traditional venues. Not the Inside Out program, which is high schools and schools, but doing what I have done, working in mental health facilities, Vietnam vets, domestic abuse shelters, and on those kinds of places versus schools. And I think a capstone course in English, especially for the creative writers, which is a huge part of our department now, it's really gone through the roof. That would be excellent because they would learn to teach. They would also be benefiting they would be using their craft outside of the classroom. It would be benefiting the people they were working with because they'd be able to, express themselves in these different situations and so forth. So that's one thing that came up with. And since you asked me, I just want to ask, which person is Zach? Is Zach here?
Oh, he had your matching beard.
That's what I thought.
Without the whiteness.
Yeah, he's younger. But anyway, okay, because I got to contact him. That's something I was thinking about in a philosophy and letters class, is to have students do something. But I see the citizenship and the service learning and all of those things very applicable, especially Well, I also ran and still do run the intern program in the English department since 1985, but who's counting? And that's another thing, what I'm thinking listening to you, is that ought to be a requirement for all English majors, for example, to have to do an internship so that they're working somewhere in the field and having, a genuine experience related to their major. Does that make sense?
So the point is, there have been
yes.
people all over the place doing it for years and years and years and years. So, much of the time, this would be something that's already going on. And it wouldn't do to make
Sure.
it too formalized and put limits on it. That's what I'm saying.
See, I think the opposite. I think that the opportunity, I think ML in that sense is a model. It's really what I was talking about in terms of, we disagree, Sandra.
Yeah, we never do.
But
That's quite a department you're in there, I have to say.
But I think that that the kind of work that you've always done has been infused with public purpose. And so, to me, what you do is a model for the kinds of things that could be done. And your creative response to the idea right now suggests that when we're in conversation about these things and where you're thinking about them, you just came up with 3 or 4 new ideas in 2 minutes.
Got them all here.
I think that we should always try and market, have students realize that they're more marketable, even if they have extremely excellent, concrete, hardcore skills, basic like math and sciences or whatever, or if they have other skills besides soft skills, what you're talking about, like community engagement, activities that they can put on their resumes. If there was a choice within HR between one candidate and another one for the same job, obviously they're going to take the one who's more well-rounded, because you see, if they get the job, they can work their way up. If the person in HR can see that they can wear many different hats, well, they know this about one particular area in the company, and they know more about another area than some other person who's only just got with tunnel vision in the area that he's been technically trained in. So I think that really a good capstone course in most majors would be excellent to benefit all students, whatever area their majors are in.
Thank you. Jeff?
So I'm the remaining political scientist in the room, and I teach American government, which is sort of our, like one of the main places where we think we teach civics at Wayne State. And one of the things that struck me about your talk is how little of what you were talking about in terms of the different civic roles people could perform are actually things we teach in American government. And what I mean is that there's this sense among our students beginning in high school that the civic roles are defined as being paying your taxes, voting, and military service. And that's about the full scope of the definition of civic roles that students come out of high school with. And that what we try to do in the American government class is populate civic roles and how a bill becomes a law and federalism and stuff like that with an understanding of the students' interests. And how these different civic roles, like these narrowly defined civic roles, interrelate to their interests and how they can advance their interests. And so one of the things that struck me, kind of being more introspective about what I teach in light of like the general education thing and so on, is the narrowness of the way we teach civics, the lack of a sense that volunteering is something that's important, even though it's something that I do and it's important to my family, that is not something that you get from an introduction to American textbook. It's constraining in that way. And I think maybe in a way the point I want to make that's weighs on me the most is that in my classroom, I think it's important for me to expose students to the different sets of interests. Like, there's not just, I'm not like preaching for the Democratic Party. I want the students to see both perspectives, and the type of civic roles that I think would be important in the course that, in ways, most instrumental for teaching them civics. Like, I would feel uncomfortable pushing them one way or the other in terms of like whose yard sign they should put up in their front yard and things like that, and like how if and I also teach courses on like political parties at higher level, and these are like a potentially capstone courses for our majors, and for those students, like what kind of this might speak to your point about infrastructure, but like if I'm not pushing them one way or the other in terms of what form of civic engagement is appropriate, who they should advocate for, it becomes very difficult as a political scientist who kind of is actively engaged in trying to teach students civics to think about what would be an appropriate program. And
Well, I don't have, yeah,
I don't have a
I
question,
understand
but,
the challenge, but you could, for example, imagine the project of former Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, who has been building and attempting to deepen both civic engagement and understanding of the Constitution. There are ways that you could engage in civic education. I'm literally making it up, but they could be tutoring in a high school civics class, for example, as one possibility. There are nonprofit organizations that are addressing voting rights of the people who are so-called returning citizens, former felons, returning to communities, issues relating to their political rights. So I think that to some extent, a lot of these things would depend on that the first response for many, and it was true for me too in history, is how are we going to do it? And I think that if we spend a little bit of the time that talking with our colleagues both inside and outside the department, preferably in a structured way, that things emerge. And that won't be problematic because clearly you don't want to you have to avoid pushing your own politics, but there could be an engagement with an organization, if it's there are civic education projects out there, things like that is all that's because I haven't given it a lot of thought either, how you would do it.
mm-hmm. Yeah, can I make 2 quick points real quick? The first, and this is the practical thing about the gen ed reform, one of my concerns with the capstone or the civic education requirement is that it will become extractive of the community rather than contribute to the community. Just sticking our students on the community, I have mixed feelings about. It's important that we actually help rather than suck up resources that these community organizations desperately need. The second is that the studies of civic education show that students only value these experiences if they actually think they're contributing to a greater public good. And so it's important to pair students in the correct program where they actually feel like they're making a difference. And I think that's actually that might be the biggest challenge of constructing this on a scale that can accommodate 4,000 students a year.
I agree with you. It can't be extractive. It has to be contributive, and that's for everyone's sake. As you made your second point, students have to feel that they're not exploiting people, but are, at the same time, it should, from a faculty member's point of view, advance the learning outcomes of the class. It's got to be connected. It's not just service. It's got to be connected to the reason why you teach the class itself, and that the experience will help you and your students to fulfill whatever your learning outcomes are. And I think that for students to value it, yes, they need to feel like they're contributing, and at the same time, I think in a selfish way, also enhancing their abilities as a student.
Mm-hmm.
And my argument is that they should be able to do both, and that has long-term benefits in terms of job skills, civic skills, and knowledge. So I fully agree with you. It's why I believe there has to be a real organizational effort, that you can't just rely on faculty relationships, because that will, I don't think that that's a sustainable model. But it always has to be, and it's one of the ways that I think the latest literature that I've read speaks to the way in which the community is contributing to the students' education, but in a way that is enhancing their own needs. From what I've read, most organizations prize this volunteering, not when it's going in there with the spirit of contributing and learning, rather than the way in which too much in the way of gown and town happens out of an act of noblesse oblige. And that kind of attitude that's disastrous. There's got to be a kind of mutual learning experience going on and mutual benefit. So,
Okay, I think we should turn.
Thank you.
Good.